Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Amazon, proud sponsor of WPLN's daily show, This Is Nashville, engaging our differences so we can discover our unity. More on Amazon's community work at aboutamazon.com.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. In My Place educates listeners on what cities like Nashville can do to prevent and end homelessness while caring for our neighbors who are still unhoused. We'll talk to national and local guests about everything from best practices to worst failures and hear from people who intimately know the complexities of having nowhere to go. This show highlights how affordable housing affects each of us, even if we think it doesn't. This series was created in part thanks to support from Pinnacle Financial Partners. Now, today's is episode 7 of our 9-episode series, so let's get into it. Supportive housing. What is it exactly? It's a bit of a mix. The first ingredient is affordable housing, something I think everyone can get behind. The next elements added are services that will help people stay in their homes. Now, my next guest works with an organization that is a leader in the development of supportive housing. Leah Werner is the Director of Supportive Housing for the Corporation of Supportive Housing, or CASH. She covers Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Leah, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to speak with you today.
Really a pleasure. A pleasure. Okay, so in past episodes of our series, we spoke about the nature of homelessness solutions like housing first, prevention, and a variety of other topics. Today, we will focus on what it actually takes to build permanent supportive housing. Leah, I have to ask you this. Tell us more about CSH and a little bit about how you ended up there.
CSH stands for Corporation for Supportive Housing. We're a national nonprofit headquartered in New York City, and we have a presence all across the country, working to advance supportive housing as a key housing intervention for marginalized communities. And we do that through training and education, like what I'm doing here with you today. We are a community development financial institution, so we invest in mission-driven supportive housing projects. And of course, we work on advocacy issues at the state, local, and federal level, really looking at those key pieces of legislation and funding that either advance our work or hinder our work. And in terms of how I ended up here, I have a long career in community development and affordable housing development. I used to be an affordable housing developer, which really has served me well in the training and education on how to actually develop the bricks and sticks of supportive housing. And I've been here almost 10 years. Now,
I understand that you recently worked here in Nashville to help the city open its 90-unit permanent supportive housing called Strobel House. A lot of people are excited about it. Now, in this situation, it was the city who made this happen. Tell me this, though. Who are the typical developers of permanent supportive housing, and what funding sources are out there for them to use?
Well, Strobel House is really unique. I had never heard of a city government putting that many capital dollars into the creation of supportive housing. So kudos to the Metro Nashville government. So typically we have for-profit and nonprofit developers. Nonprofit developers being mission-oriented developers whose sole mission is to create and sustain supportive housing. And then we have for-profit real estate development firms that partner with sponsors that oftentimes come in the forms of supportive service providers to tackle capital applications like the low-income housing tax credit capital application. So we have, developers that are really, really small to working in multiple states, 13 states across the country. And they work diligently to secure resources that are very competitive and nowhere near touch the need of supportive housing and affordable housing across the country.
What about the funding sources? What type of funding sources are out there for them?
So the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program is a program within the IRS, and that program is the largest generator of equity for the creation of affordable housing. And affordable housing is a big umbrella of which supportive housing lives under. So your Tennessee Housing Development Agency is the broker of both 9% competitive low-income housing tax credits and 4% credits that are married with bonds that are leveraged by the state of Tennessee. So those are the largest generator of equity for affordable and supportive housing. Next up are resources that flow from the Department of Housing and Urban Development down to the state of Tennessee, down to jurisdictions like Nashville, like Knoxville, like Memphis, to create and sustain affordable housing. Another kind of go-to capital source is funds from the Federal Home Loan Bank System. There's 11 of them across the country. It's a banker's bank. And by congressional charter, they have to invest 10% of their net proceeds into affordable housing. So that's oftentimes a significant line item in the development budget. And then you can't minimize philanthropy. We see community foundations helping furnish units, upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars to really tend to the gaps in the capital stack. So we have tried and true capital resources to create affordable and supportive housing. But once again, they're nowhere near the capacity to touch the need.
Okay, so do a favor for us. Can you define what permanent supportive housing truly is? Like, who is it intended to serve? And tell us what elements are needed, what elements need to be in place to make it work.
So supportive housing is a combination of affordable housing. And what that means is you're not spending more than 30% of your gross annual income on housing and utilities. So that's the affordable side of the equation. Supportive means tenants have access to voluntary, tenant-centered, and robust supported services that are really tailored to what they need, right? So it's access to primary care. It's access to behavioral health care. It's access to soft skill developments. When you're moving in someone from off the street, do they know how to pay bills? Do they know how to keep their unit clean? Do they know how to abide by the terms of the lease? There's so many different services that go under the supportive services umbrella, and it really is tailored to the exact needs of the participant. And that is why it's successful, right? Because you're not doing this cookie cutter approach. You're not making these broad generalizations about what someone needs to be successful. At CSH, we like to elevate the but for affordability, people would not be housed, and but for services, they would not stay housed. So services really is the secret sauce in helping someone stay housed. And that is, in fact, the number one goal in supportive housing, because if we cannot help maintain housing retention, property management and services working in partnership with the tenant to stay housed, then we will not see the outcomes that really speak to why supportive housing is an evidence-based best practice. Outcomes and improvements in mental health, physical health, reunification with your children, building up job skills and getting a job and paying taxes. None of those outcomes that we see time and time again in supportive housing will materialize if we cannot first meet the first goal, which is housing retention. So some people think supportive housing is licensed or it's a facility. No, like Strobel House, it's an apartment building. It's an apartment building, a beautiful apartment building that has services on site that are tailored to the needs of those 90 residents. So it's not the hammer on the nail of folks living in poverty. It's folks who really do need that affordability to be able to find and maintain housing. And the services really are critical to help people stabilize, to move from crisis to stability to thriving.
Now, you mentioned the need of two services, mental and physical health services are needed from folks. You've worked with Medicaid in other states. How can Medicaid help with the creation of permanent supportive housing programs?
There's about 27 states plus the District of Columbia that have created waivers. So they knock on CMS's door, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and says, we want to waive some of your regulation in order to provide a specific service for a specific population. And these 27 states plus the District of Columbia are creating housing-related services. So a couple of those waivers include tenancy supports, which is a non-medical benefit that helps someone find housing and maintain housing. So let's say you need to get your driver's license reinstated. Let's say you need help getting your birth certificate to get a driver's license. it really is a beautiful kind of case management catch-all that allows folks to receive the critical supports necessary to find housing and maintain housing. There's waivers for peer supports, supported employment, getting assistance, finding a job and maintaining a job. And, the waiver path really has been quite successful in these states, and it's oftentimes the secret ingredient in supportive service budgets to make sure that supportive service providers are adequately resourced so that they can, in fact, provide the robust and tenant-centered services that I've just referenced.
In your experience, how well do politicians understand the need for supportive housing and what they can do within their power to help?
Well, it really spans the gamut. We have some legislators that think housing first is an abject public policy failure, and wants to go back to mandating treatment, transitional housing, etc. And then we have allies in the state house and in federal government that really get it and really want to invest resources and time and advance policies that support this work. So it really does run the gamut in terms of people's understanding of the value of supportive housing and why it is an evidence-based best practice. I will say that supportive housing and housing first is in the crosshairs right now. Ever since the Grants Pass decision, the Supreme Court decision allowing jurisdictions to ticket and arrest people who are experiencing homelessness, we see this awful rhetoric bubbling up that's really kind of blaming people for their lot in life instead of really looking at the systemic reasons that perpetuate homelessness. And those two clear reasons are a severe shortage of housing that people can afford and a lack of supportive services. I mean, Nashville's a perfect example. Your city leadership and mayor fully understand the value of supportive housing. They understand why it's an evidence-based best practice. And that is, in fact, why they have allocated so many resources and built Strobel House.
Our next guest is going to be happy you said that because they're a representative of Metro's housing department. I'd like to introduce Angela Hubbard. She is Metro's housing director here with us in the studio. Angie, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So can you briefly describe the task of Metro's housing division in the planning department?
Absolutely. First, I want to point out our division has only been around since January 2022. Previously, as we dealt with housing in the city, there's been the Metro Development and Housing Agency, which everyone recognizes has the public housing sites as well as the Section 8 vouchers. But then within the city itself, because MDHA is completely separate, there might have been a couple of staff within a mayor's office. Those staff would leave when a mayor transitioned office. So we lost any continuity around housing policy, a management of our housing trust fund. And in 2021, Mayor Cooper, when he was in office, established an affordable housing task force with one of their top recommendations is to have a standalone office outside of a mayor's office that could keep that continuity going. So our division is tasked with setting the overall housing policies and priorities for how Metro uses its funds, incentives, property that we might make available for housing. We also are creating new tools that supplement some of the federal resources and private resources that Leah mentioned. And then align a lot of our partners across Metro, the Office of Homeless Services, Metro Social Services, and our private partners so that we're not stepping over each other. We're addressing any gaps in any funding delivery, service delivery, provision of, and development of housing. So we're kind of the umbrella organization to bring it all together.
Okay. Now, we spoke with Leah about some of the tools available to developers to actually build housing. Metro recently had a few announcements about new housing tools, including the Catalyst Fund, Unified Housing Strategy, and most recently, Metro announced that it would create a faith-based development institute with a new $5 million federal grant to remove barriers to housing. Tell me this, what are the most useful tools in Metro's affordable housing toolbox?
The most useful tools for permanent supportive housing are those tools that don't require repayment of the money. Because this is the hardest type of housing development to get financed in any kind of sector. Mm-hmm. So think about when you're going to purchase a home, what you can purchase that home for is based on what your income is. The same with an apartment developer. What they can afford to pay down on a loan from a bank is dependent on how much rent they can bring in. And for permanent supportive housing, those rents are going to be lower by nature. And so having programs like the Barnes Housing Trust Fund, I will say, is probably our best avenue for a permanent supportive housing and deeply affordable housing because it's a grant. So that helps developers leverage these other financing mechanisms like the low-income housing tax credits, any other, if they have to actually borrow through a traditional bank, it reduces the amount they have to borrow. So the Housing Trust Fund is by far the most effective in that space. We get an allocation of about $30 million every year from Metro we've been consistent in the past 3 to 4 years. We haven't been intentional, however, in setting aside money specifically for that. There are bonus points, but a lot of where we are is that lack of intentionality historically on saying this is a priority for the city, for our funding sources. And with the ability to use American Rescue Plan Act dollars, $25 million of that did go to specifically focus on permanent supportive and deeply affordable housing so that we can bring more of those online as quick as possible. So those have been our two biggest and most effective resources.
Okay, now housing advocates keep focusing on how many units we need in Nashville. Tell us this, what is the need for low-income housing in the city?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is define affordable, because that seems to be the question du jour everywhere I go. When I am using the term affordable, and anyone on my team and in Metro, we are talking about housing that's income restricted. The broader term is no one should be paying more than 30% of their income for housing, but we are focusing on housing that is restricted to incomes at or below 60% of our area median income. So that is for a one-person household, that's around $41,900 for a certain period of time. A minimum is 10 to 15 years. The Barnes Fund's 30 years, so that we can have housing that's available for the long term. So when I talk about affordable housing, that's the type of housing that I'm talking about. That's how we use our tools. And can you repeat the second part of your question?
I was just interested in what's the need here? Yeah.
So the Affordable Housing Task Force report said that we needed, which was published in 2021, we needed to create or preserve 50,000 units by 2030 to meet our current need and future demand. And that really translates to having about 5,000 units in our pipeline every year that we're either building new or we're preserving. We're keeping from losing because we cannot lose our existing affordable housing stock. And so that can be accomplished a number of ways. We can't really build our way out of it. There's just not enough resources. But the ways that we can utilize rental assistance programs or other new tools, we have a mixed income payment in lieu of tax to create affordability in units that are already on the market that we don't have to construct. So we're approaching this in many different ways to get at that 5,000. When the Affordable Housing Task Force report was created, we were putting about 1,300 units in the pipeline. We're at about 3,700 units. So we still have a ways to go to get to that 5,000 per year. And that's one of the things we're looking at through this unified housing strategy, or what are those additional tools and strategies to get us there.
Okay, now, Leah, the individual situations of people seeking housing can be complex. But is the general issue of building housing equally complex? I'm taking like a view from the International Space Station here. Are we simply making this more difficult by our approaches to help fix this problem?
I mean, the build strategy is a tried and true strategy. We have an aging housing stock. We have the capital sources that I just referenced that are great vehicles to develop new housing. But more units in the United States of supportive housing are considered integrated supportive housing, where providers partner with private landlords. They bring the rental subsidy, access to those voluntary and tenant-centered services to create integrated supportive housing that can exist in any neighborhood across the country. And the great path of integrated supportive housing is really noting the ease of integration. You already have a site that's zoned, because oftentimes going through the zoning appeals process triggers community opposition. So the environment is already built, and it's our job to find landlords, recruit landlords, bring that rental subsidy to assure that affordability, bring a quality supportive service provider like Park Center, who's on here today, to offer supportive housing in an integrated setting using private landlord housing.
Leah Werner is the Director of Supportive Housing for CSH. She covers Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Leah, thank you so much for being here with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Angela Hubbard will stick with us through the break. Okay, when we come back, we'll visit a local property where a developer and a community are working together to make an impact on housing. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. For many people who are unhoused, the transition into a permanent home can be surprisingly difficult. This is Nashville's Catherine Cece's, and Tasha A.F. Lemley recently visited a property where a local developer is working with community partners to help make the move into housing smoother and last longer.
It took me about 3 days before it slipped out that, I'm going home. And I went, home? Wow. Really? Home? My own place?
That's Karen Breimer. After years of living with hundreds of women at the Nashville Rescue Mission, she is now sitting on her own couch at the Wallace Studio Apartments.
Since they opened May 6th, I was the first one in.
This spring, Breimer used a Section 8 voucher to get her new apartment, which came with features like granite countertops and a full kitchen, with food already in the pantry.
If I were to design a building to get the homeless off the streets, whether out of camps or out of shelters, I would have done it exactly like this. And I'm impressed. I'm thoroughly impressed that someone actually is doing it.
That someone is developer Adam Rosenberg, who managed the transformation of an old 2-story motel into 132 studio units.
We are a for-profit developer. Our investors are investing in this project because not only do they get a good return on their invested capital, but they're helping a community.
Rosenberg knew he had the technical know-how to overhaul properties, but he also realized that there was a lot he didn't know about working with formerly homeless tenants. So he reached out to Ryan Samuels, an old friend who works in affordable housing in Washington, D.C. Together, they navigated the legal requirements and additional tenant approval processes that come with accepting housing vouchers. They also talked about what it could look like for a developer to help create a support system for recently unhoused tenants. Rosenberg hired a consultant familiar with local nonprofits and started attending community meetings, one where he met Alex Smith.
And I kind of just asked him, did he have any peer support program or anything available? And he said that he would love to talk to me about it.
Rosenberg soon asked Smith to help design a peer support program for the Wallace Studios.
I was homeless for 10 years. So for me, this is very personal. And honestly, I was sick and tired of hearing the people moving in 1 month and then dying 2 months later because nobody checked them. So this will be a peer support program that will check on everyone.
Wallace Studios now has 2 certified peer support specialists. They're on site to help tenants settle in and address whatever concerns they have. Sort of like a college RA, but with personal experience navigating city, state, and recovery resources. Also, right now, United Neighborhood Health Services, Mental Health Co-op, and the mobile food pantry NextGen make regular visits to the property. 3 months in, Breimer still calls Wallace Studios paradise, even though she's running into challenges. She has 0 income, limited physical mobility, and didn't expect the minimum $50 of rent a month that the voucher program requires. Making that payment is proving challenging.
Yeah, I've panhandled for it. I've relied on a few other folks who have helped out. And one time I had to sell my food stamps so that I could keep my apartment. You risk fines, jail time, and you can never have food stamps again for as long as you live if you get caught doing it. And like I said, I only did it once, long time ago. But, you have to do what you have to do to survive.
Laundry, food, and toiletries are also a struggle. And some of that she's getting from women still staying at the Mission.
They do have access there to shampoo, conditioner, body wash, stuff like that. But things like toilet paper is the biggest commodity that no one seems to have.
Breimer says bus passes are a limited commodity as well. Piecing together what she needs and figuring out transportation to various nonprofits, it's draining, sometimes not even worth it.
And running around trying to find services that I need, I start feeling depressed and walk away from it. I'll just do without it. The hoops you have to jump through to get something as simple as food, as toilet paper. The hoops you have to jump through to be able to get that. It's ridiculous. It's so degrading.
Rosenberg and his partners are still learning as they go, pivoting and expanding, with plans to open another development soon. Breimer praises him for listening and providing what he can. For Breimer, though, housing was a step, just not the full answer to everything she needs.
If we were able to put the energy that we put into to just surviving every day into being productive members of society instead of in survival mode, we would be phenomenal.
Now, before the break, we spoke to a national expert about the tools that are needed to develop permanent supportive housing units. Now we'd like to welcome in David Langle-Martin to join Angie Hubbard. David has experience developing permanent supportive housing units for Park Center. David, welcome back to This is Nashville.
Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for being here. Okay, so Park Center recently opened some units. Can you briefly tell us what you guys do and why Park Center entered into the housing development world?
Sure, absolutely. Park Center is a 40-year-old nonprofit provider of services for people living with mental illness and addictions, and we serve people experiencing homelessness as well. Our housing program has been around for almost our entire existence, but after hitting some roadblocks, accessing new units and being able to expand at the rate that we needed to meet our demand, we realized that we were going to need to start developing units ourselves. So we're fortunate that we have properties that we own that we could redevelop and make them serve more people and kind of get more out of them, but also meet the specific needs of the people we serve and design them to meet their needs.
Now, when you develop units, like how much consideration goes into the need for support services as a part of that development process? Or another way to ask that is, are support services a part of the plan when you're designing the units?
Absolutely, yeah. Supportive services, as Leah said, are the secret sauce. They're the core of what we do at Park Center to offer people a foundation for recovery. The support that people need after many years of living outdoors and just in a completely different set of social expectations to then transition into the expectations of being a leaseholder, being a neighbor, and just being around just different systems. It takes a lot of work. It's a really difficult transition. So we put a lot of time and effort into designing services that people want and listening to the feedback that we get. And we also employ peers, as was mentioned in the previous segment, people with their own lived experience that can inform the way that we design our services.
Describe some of the units for us. What are they like?
Sure. In a lot of ways, very similar to how Wallace Studios was described. We want people to walk in and have the experience of, wow, this is bigger than I expected. This is nicer than I expected. We don't go with the basic build or grade finishes. We like to think about privacy, safety, people having their own space, a lot of individual equipment. So everyone has their own HVAC unit, their own storage pantry, their own chest freezer, their own outdoor storage unit. A lot of these things also save people time and money from having to go elsewhere. So they have as much as we can provide of what they need right there on site.
You mentioned some people like privacy, but are there any shared units?
So Park Center does own shared units. We have a few people who prefer, but in many cases, that's not their first preference. We had a much longer waiting list for one bedrooms and studio units. Mm-hmm. No one, I think, may prefer, or not many people do, but when you're, again, recovering from so many, medical issues and social and emotional issues, having your own space, particularly not having to share a bathroom and a kitchen and living room with someone, can really make a big difference. So we do offer people choice, including in our new units. We have some common space that people can access if they want, but there's no requirement and really no need to use it if they're not interested.
Oh, so what are some of the key aspects that nonprofits, who would like to develop housing units, what should they be considering?
Sure. I think there are many paths, and Leah mentioned this as well, to creating supportive housing. And so I would not necessarily recommend that every nonprofit become a housing developer unless they're really invested in creating that part of their business for the long term. But you can partner with a developer, either a nonprofit or for-profit development company who is interested in supportive housing, and advise them on how to plan and design their housing development for supportive housing. You can also, Leah mentioned, or maybe it was Angie actually mentioned, in creating affordability in existing units by bringing subsidies and services to the community, and doing it in what we call a scattered site way. In many ways is the best practice. It just may not scale in the same way that building a 90-unit apartment complex would. So, but all are valid. And I think, starting with a consultant to talk about your options and think about the path that works best for you is a good place to start.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekalona. This is episode 7 of our housing series, In My Place, with support from Pinnacle Financial Partners. We're talking this hour about supportive housing with David Langle-Martin and Angela Hubbard, Housing Director of Metro Planning Department. She's still with us. Now, Angie, Nashville is very aware of the need of service support dollars, and the Barnes Fund, which you oversee, it has awarded grants for permanent supportive housing. How do you ensure that the right supportive services are in place to help people maintain housing long term?
We have a very close relationship with our colleagues at the Office of Homeless Services, who is the point on that service side of it. Our team and April Calvin, the director, and her team and I, we meet monthly. But we went through about 3 or 4 months of our teams combined on a biweekly basis of really walking through all the elements for permanent supportive housing to ensure that as we develop funding mechanisms to create housing, that we are aligning with the priorities that the Office of Homeless Services is establishing. They defined in our recent Barnes round that was only made available for permanent supportive or deeply affordable housing. Any developer had to follow the coordinated entry process. if they were doing the supportive side, not just the deeply affordable, the Housing First approach as the Office of Homeless Services. So it's that close relationship, and then the Office of Homeless Services has the relationships with the support services side. We have the relationships with the nonprofit side, and we're trying to do a lot better because that's where we see a big gap is bringing those two together. Because I've tried in the past in different roles I've had in other places of funding permanent supportive housing, and no takers on the money because the services weren't there. Developers didn't know who to reach out to. So we're bringing those two sides together through our collaboration with another metro agency to really scale up and really bring those services.
And, the department is only 2 years old, like you mentioned. I'm sure there's a lot of pressure to handle this issue that's been going on for a long, long time. You said you're trying to bring together developers and support services and the financiers. What type of timeline are you on for bringing those two groups that you just mentioned together?
Yesterday. But we are, as I mentioned previously, the lack of intentionality historically around addressing homelessness with supportive services, making it a priority in funding mechanisms, that you're seeing immediate change in how we approach that. And we're starting now, unfortunately, the resources that are needed, because it does require more of a public subsidy in the development side of this. So it means we are not creating as many homes as we would if we were at a higher income level or without the services part, but we have to make this a priority, and that's what you're seeing us do. And it is going to take a while, unfortunately, because of the time it takes for construction. For example, if someone had a shovel in the ground today, it would be 18 to 24 months before something is move-in ready. Mm-hmm. And so that's why preserving what we have, getting affordability in existing homes is every bit as much of a focus of ours as building new.
Now, David, are there enough support services in the community? And let me ask you this as well. What are some of the funding options that you hope to see our city and state tap into?
Sure. To answer your first question, no, unfortunately, I don't think there are. I think I've seen many organizations become more interested and invested in offering that type of supportive service to do ongoing services for people who may need that level of support. I think that we have the capacity in our community to do it, and just more people maybe feel comfortable and also have the funding to do it. So to that point, we're fortunate at Park Center to have a long-standing relationship with the State Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, who has been incredibly supportive of what we do. Beyond that, we've had some support from other, government and private funding sources. But honestly, we need, in the absence of being a Medicaid expansion state, the city and the state to invest more in supportive services for people with a history of homelessness and disabling conditions. That investment inevitably pays for itself. In every study that I've seen over the last 20 years, nationally and in local regions, it is actually more cost effective to provide the housing and services to people than to allow them to remain on the street.
So we'll save money.
It will.
By helping people. It leads to this final question. I'm going to leave it for you, Angie. If we have time, I'll try to get you in as well, David. What's your biggest frustration when it comes to developing and running low-income housing, affordable housing, such as like supportive housing in Nashville? What's your biggest frustration with all of this?
I think Leah alluded to it earlier, and so I'm going to just call it out for what it is, the not in my backyard, the community opposition. NIMBYism. I haven't met a single person who doesn't want us the city to solve homelessness, to address affordability. I challenge people that bought a home 10 years ago to tell me if they could afford to purchase that home today. If they had a health crisis, an economic crisis, any other crisis, if their housing security would be at risk. And so my frustration is there's a lot, I think everybody's on board about what we need to do, but unwilling to participate in the solutions. And that's my biggest frustration.
David, I got about 30 seconds. What's your biggest frustration?
Sure. I can just piggyback on that. We have a lot of neighbors at Park Center who love having us next door to them. And I think that's one of our biggest assets is our neighbor support. If more people knew what it was like living near us and they knew, what it was like for people that they may know, family members, friends who have mental health issues or addiction issues, to have the support, services, and the foundation of a safe and stable home, then they would get on board. So just getting the word out about what we do and what it's really like being near us.
So you're both kind of telling everybody to put your money where your opinion is.
Or put your support where your opinion is.
There
Absolutely.
we go. All right. I want to thank my guests, Angela Hubbard, Housing Director for Metro Nashville Planning, and David Langle Martin. He is the Chief Housing Officer at Park Center. Again, thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We're going to take one last break. When we'll come back, we'll talk with a former guest of the show with lived experience for real-time feedback to what we've discussed today. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. As usual, we're ending our episode by bringing on a special guest commentator, and we welcome back Anita Smith, who is not only a former guest of the show. Anita, I think you were one of the first guests This is Nashville ever had. She's had lived experience with homelessness, and I want to welcome her back. Anita, thank you so much for being here.
And thank you for having me again. Yes, we've had a good topic to talk about today because I am still doing a homeless transition.
Okay, I want to talk about that. In episode 5, we heard that you were entering a new home just a couple months ago.
Yes.
Deeply, deeply moving, and congratulations.
Thank you.
But I do understand it's been a hard road.
It has been terribly hard. And a lot of times I'm the voice of the quiet person, the one that's struggling and has no voice out there as I try to advocate for homelessness. But my transition has lasted over a span of, this 24, since 2007. It's been on and off. And this last part of it, moving back to Nashville, I'm staying in a rooming house now. And that's that shared living that was mentioned. I think David talked a little bit about it, what Park Center offers. But shared living is not for everyone. Mm-hmm. I'm 60 years old, and I suffer with mental illness. And most of the residents, I have to say, they're suffering with something in the house that I live in. And it's just not for everyone. But if services are provided, I really love that part. Wraparound services, vouchers, and not vouchers, but waiving some of the things that the prospective tenant has to go through just to get housing, to be even looked at. I think that will help in a mighty, mighty ways.
Tell me this, what was your experience like when you first entered this apartment again after your latest housing insecurity? How did it feel to you?
I was living in let me just real quick say this. I was living in a house that I was trying to purchase in another city in Tennessee. And I thought I was equipped. Mm-hmm. But the challenge, mental illness, I really stress that. Mental illness is such a challenging thing. I can do some tasks real good, I think, and then other tasks, I can't walk through it. And so paying bills on time, making the right connection and doing this, that, and the other, I was in a trap. I was buying a house in another city in Nashville, and not Nashville, but Tennessee, and I was sinking the whole time. Mm-hmm. And so then the house had repairs it needed when we had a freeze last year. and the freeze came and the flooding came, and I didn't know what to do, who to contact. And I laid in an uninhabitable house for months at a time, and to the point where I have a vehicle and I would sleep outside my house.
Wow.
And so this craziness is getting the information to the people, getting the information to the prospective developers, because a lot of times they don't know what they're getting into. They say, we're going to fix 90 units affordable housing, but how do you really follow through?
Mm-hmm. As you're going through your situation, what are some of the most important or urgent things that you needed?
I needed help and didn't know how to get the help. I thought I could do it on my own. I was a Lyft and Uber driver, and my money went everywhere. It went everywhere. I didn't know how to manage money, have never really managed money really good. And so I was just all over the place. And I represent a lot of people out there. It is a lot of professional drivers, as I call myself, that are homeless and living in their cars.
Do you think, you said, we were talking about the services that people need, the services that people and organizations like the representatives we had earlier in the show are providing to folks. A lot of times we talk about the mental health aspects or the physical health aspects of that. What about like money management and things? Are those services that you would really like to see be put into place with supportive housing?
It has to be a part of it eventually. You can't bake the cake without the eggs. Mm-hmm. You got to put all the ingredients that go in that cake mix. And money management, physical, mental health, getting documents back, getting the documents that are required to go get the license or go get the state ID. These people are losing their storage units. Again, money management. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the young lady that came on earlier, and she talked about how it was so hard for her to get up $50. She had to sell her food stamps. That's a realistic thing.
Yeah,
that's not like out of that's not normal. This is normal.
So that is a common occurrence, choosing rent or actually eating, or in some cases, probably medication as well.
Medication. Mm. And then you have other things that come into play with the homeless. I'm experiencing something right now that I'm not even staying in my place on a regular basis. I do have family in Nashville. I thank God for them. And that's one of the reasons I did want to come back to Nashville. But my place is all over the place. It's not home. It's not home.
It's not home, you said.
I'm grateful to have a roof over my head, but it is not home.
Is that how a lot of the people you represent and talk to in the community, is that how they feel? Like, I have a place, but it's not home.
It's not home.
What is needed to make it home?
It's got to be a wraparound services. I promise you. The gentleman that was on the line earlier, and he talked about checking on people, making sure. I have been in a situation in the last 3 months where I visit some housing places, and I was able to spend the night there, and people were found dead. Well, didn't nobody know Mr. So-and-so was in the rooms 3 weeks by herself? Didn't nobody knock on the door? Didn't nobody knock on the door? And so I don't know what might happen. This place that I'm living in, I don't want to name the
I understand.
The property management. I think well of them, but it's going to take a time or two for people to get it together.
Out of everything you heard today in our conversation, what really stood out to you?
I would say partnership and development with these people that are building the homes, making affordable housing really stick out and not just a part of something in the news.
Make it mean something.
Make it mean something.
More than a headline.
We've seen the headline over and over again. But as Angie said, making it a priority. Yeah.
Anita, thank you.
Hey, thank you
so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.
All right, bye.
Thanks to you all for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Judith Tackett and Tasha A.F. Lemley. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. Special thanks once again to Pinnacle Financial Partners. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. You can call or leave us a message at 615-751-2500. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekalona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And let's put our support where our mouth is and be good to each other.